Greetings, comic book friends. It is I, Damien, aka Sleepy Reader, and in this video this time around, I wanted to share with you one of my favorite comic book art books, Big John Buscema, Comics and Drawings, and so I will turn around the camera and we'll do a little flip through together, and I'll try to think of something interesting to say about it. So let's turn the camera around. So this book is originally a catalog for an art show honoring John Buscema back in 2009 for a month in the town of Palma, Spain. So it's amazing that they would do this very complete kind of art show for an American artist who probably never got this kind of celebration in America. They brought over his wife, his widow, Dolores. It's too bad this didn't happen during his lifetime. Here's Dolores here and here. So let's see. But and I think they interviewed Dolores extensively. So a lot of the information in this book comes from Dolores. They also gathered up information from lots of interviews that John Buscema had done, and even some interviews with other people who had interacted with John Buscema in various ways. And you get the text is in English and in Spanish. I think there's also a French edition of this book. I feel like I've seen that somewhere. So you get competing columns, and it's mostly translated very well into English. There's a few bits where it lagged, but I thought overall it was very good. And I love, someone who used to be a little bit of an arts journalist, I love the fact that they let you know where all their sources are. It doesn't feel like they're just sort of making it up and putting it together. It all feels extremely well researched. So you get, the story of his childhood, his parents, his early days becoming an artist. Here we get sort of some of his influences. Let's see, what is this? This is from 1959. So it goes somewhat in order, but skips around. And we learn how John Buscema, after studying art for a while, was looking for a job and had a friend in comics. And then he found a classified ad in the paper that had been put out by Stan Lee looking for comic book artists. And he got to be a staff artist at Timely, which later became Marvel, for a year and a half, until they decided to work completely with freelancers. And he really had a good time working in that office with Stan Lee, with a whole bunch of other artists, some as young as him, some more experienced. I think this was circa maybe 48, 49, somewhere around there. So we got various samples. I mean, here is his work from 1958, and it already looks very much, in many ways, like the John Buscema we know. He was a incredibly talented person, obviously, and art just came to him. He was someone born to be an artist. Then things sort of fell through with the freelance comic book business after a while, and so he had to go into advertising art. Um, but he did not like advertising art because it kept him away from his families with the crazy deadlines, the commute into New York City. So eventually, when Stan said, "Hey, things are good in comics again, why don't you come work for us?" Uh, I think he was happy to do so that he could work at his home in Long Island and not come into the city that often and spend more time with his family. So, and he was very intimidated at first because you had to live up to the Jack Kirby way of doing comics. But eventually, I think he cracked that nut and added in his own sort of more realistic, what I think of as kind of a who was the Flash go Alex Raymond kind of touch along into the Kirby style that was predominant. So as you can see, there's just all kinds of wonderful material in here. And what develops as you read along is that Buscema, John Buscema, I know his brother Sal loved to draw comics. Buscema was always muttering and complaining about doing comics, and he always felt kind of guilty. that he hadn't become a painter, and a painter was a real artist, I guess, in his mind. But the weird thing is, he just loved to draw, and even when he was done doing his work drawing, he would go back to his studio at night and do more drawing. And of course, he liked, the less he did superheroes, the more he liked it. Sadly for us who love superheroes, but he loved doing Conan. I think he enjoyed doing Thor quite a bit. Um, but I mean, he always did a fantastic job, whatever work he's on. I personally feel his work from the 70s, the late 60s and early 70s, maybe his first decade at Marvel, was his most exciting. I think what we have here is a rejected cover and the cover they actually went with eventually. I think they probably wanted, it almost looks like they maybe trimmed it out. They probably wanted the Silver Surfer and this alien to be bigger and stand out in the picture, so they removed the background. So this is just a treasure trove of um, of John Buscema artwork from throughout his career. It's a nice large size. It's not the size of one of those artist editions, but it's a very nice large size. And I think it's out of print. This is actually the second printing of it, I think, in the U.S. by IDW. It'd be great if they brought it back. But I think you can get it for not too much on eBay. I mean, not too much over the original list price. I found it in a comic book store, Cosmic Monkey, that has a whole section of comic art books. And there it was, and so I think I paid full price, but I was happy to do so. Here's some of the pencils from his romance work. There's the first appearance of Valkyrie there. He drew beautiful women. I think at first he had trouble drawing women, but I think eventually he became known for. And I think if you're someone who draws and you try to draw like John Buscema, you discover exactly how hard that is to do. I'll just flip a little faster because there's a whole section on Conan coming up. And I think that was the happiest part of his drawing career when he did Conan. Apparently when he did Tarzan, he felt less happy with his work on Tarzan. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was because he kind of followed Joe Kubert on Tarzan. Oh, here's some Kazar. So apparently he had a lot of issues with Stan Lee. I think they loved working together at first, but over time there were some issues, and I think he once he was doing the Silver Surfer, he felt Stan Lee was too critical of his work, and then years later, this issue that Stan told him wasn't up to snuff. Later, he told him it was the very best issue of Silver Surfer. So he just wanted, I think, a more positive feedback from Stan Lee. Now here's the incredible Conan work. Um, the confusing thing about a lot of Conan is it had these incredible inkers who kind of overpowered his work, and that's another discussion. He was not happy with a lot of these inkers. His favorite inker was apparently Frank Giacoa, but ideally he wanted to ink himself, but he liked making a very good living for his family. So the money for him, he was a very fast penciler. The money was in penciling. And then as time went on, he was doing looser and looser pencils, and they would have the inker carry more of the burden, and he was more of the storyteller. And I think that's another thing that you always have to realize with John Buscema is what a great visual storyteller he was. Now this is inked by both Buscema and McLeod. I wonder if this page, it looks like it's all Buscema here. So his own inking style gave the drawings more air, more space, and it was very refined, I would say, but also still carried a looseness. I think we're looking at. Oh, this is later, Conan 161. I think what happened over time is in the maybe the reason I like his work so much from like the late 60s to the mid 70s is the Kirby influence was strong there, and over time maybe there was less Kirby influence, and this fashion at Marvel was for a little more toned down artwork. This is fun, just a whole bunch of different eyes of Conan. He definitely to me gave Conan a wonderful intensity, made Conan the figure that kind of physically dominated any scene that he was in. Um, oh, and here's the famous vulture scene where it comes directly from the Robert E. Howard story where he's crucified and has to fight off vultures with his mouth. These are very small, but this is like one of my favorite Savage Sword of Conan pages right there, inked by Alfredo Alcala. Alcala deserves an art book all of his own. And in fact, I do have a smaller art book about Alcala. Here's more Alcala inking over Buscema. You can see why it's no longer Buscema artwork, right? It is Buscema storytelling with Alcala artwork on top of it. And you can see if he had these heavier inkers, why he would tend towards doing rougher pencils because since his pencils weren't going to survive. Now that I'm talking about that, here is more pages that he inked himself. And this is an example of how in my mind, became a little more restrained, a little less over the top Kirby actiony later on. And then in some circles, he's very famous for doing the Wizard of Oz giant size treasury, which he drew from memory, from having seen the movie in the theater. And that's, I guess, another aspect of him that I learned about in here, that he had this incredible visual memory, which is extremely useful to a comic book artist who has to draw hundreds of drawings, a week, if not more. So you don't have to look up what everything looked like if it's still in your head. Here's some great covers. In the later era of Conan, he did a lot of the covers. Here's kind of a comparison to the black and white and the color. Um, it looks like this is one of those color guides, not the actual printed color. And was this this is an unpublished cover, so they ended up going with this cover here. That's interesting. I don't know why. Perhaps these are other unpublished covers. I'm not sure. That's just amazing. And it evokes kind of a Frazetta style Conan, where Conan is on top of a heap of bodies and more coming at him. I'm guessing this is an unpublished cover. Let's see. Oh, that's a published cover, inked by Alan Weiss. Another interesting thing is that for a while he started kind of his own comic art school, art sort of a series of classes you could take in New York City. And I think that predates Joe Kubert. I don't know if he influenced Joe Kubert in that idea. And they quote some people who thought that his classes were very good, and others who thought that Buscema was a burnt out character who was not a good teacher. So who knows what the truth is there. So as some art collectors who collect pages of art by John Buscema will sometimes find that on the back of the pages, he was drawing some more. He was trying out different poses and different things. Um, and he was always roughing in things. This is probably an example of what, maybe a little tighter than this, but what some of his looser layout style drawings might have looked like. And we got some Tarzan. Eventually, he kind of retired, but he still kept coming back and doing some drawings here that there. He was doing drawings for fans. He had kind of an agent who would bring in business for him, and he got very sick of people requesting that was Silver Surfer 4 cover recreations. Um, so the whole what's the name of this thing? The I think one of the things he came back for was the Warriors of the Shadow Realm, which became this kind of odd painted comic. But so his wife, once he retired, his wife kept saying, how come you have all this time now? How come you're not painting? Because, he had dreamed all his life of being a painter, and he kept saying, it's complicated. I can't explain it. I can't paint. So I think he just spent his life drawing. I don't feel that. I mean, everyone has regrets, I suppose, but he was making a living drawing, and drawing was his natural forte. Here's a character he created himself, Bront. I remember this appearing in Savage Sword or somewhere else. And then right at the end, I don't know, we haven't really got there yet. Right at the end, he was doing some work for DC, quite a bit of which was unpublished or never unfinished projects. Um, Here's an unpublished page, which he didn't finish inking. There's quite a few of those around because I bought one myself. I think I showed it in my video of Conan comic art. Here's an example of, I believe, every page he did, he worked it out first in these rough sketches. Again, I own a few of those. I showed them in my video of Conan art. Um, they almost seem like enough for a skilled inker to work with, a finisher. But I think that these were still roughs, and then he would work on it some more. Maybe he used a light box or the like. There's a rough, and there's a finished picture. There's another half inked one. It says study for page 56 of Conan the Rogue. Or maybe this here is the study. So the amount of drawing he must have done, 8 or 10 hours of work a day, and then 4 or 5 more hours of just fiddling around in the studio because he loved drawing. So that seems like a life well spent to me. Here's some of his DC work. He did What If Superman was created by Stan Lee. Here's one of his self portraits. More sort of unfinished studies. I think I saw a few of these like published in fanzines when I was a kid, or similar pieces anyway. Another example of him laying out pages for Conan. Little Red Sonja pinup. What are they calling this? Just a study. It looks like he's practicing how Conan would be grabbing someone. Um, Study of someone fighting a lion, saber-toothed tiger. Man, I wish I could draw like this, or even halfway close to this. And if you're a fan of Marvel in the late 70s, early 80s, you can just see tons of artists who were in the shadow of Buscema, the way artists used to be in the shadow of Jack Kirby. I think eventually a lot of Marvel artists were in the shadow of Buscema. He was their top artist. So, and here's a full list of every publication of anything with John Buscema in it. So this is just a wonderful resource with, if you're curious about, if you like to read about the life of the artist, it's fantastic. And you feel like the research was done properly. And if you just like to look at the wonderful art. So it's a book that I truly love. And thanks for joining me for this page through. Talk to you all later.